let a guard commander hold me once. Next day, 900 warriors waited outside. Alpha Queen. I stood at the window of my chambers, watching King Aldrich laugh with Lady Margot and her sisters in the rose gardens below. The sound of his laughter carried on the evening breeze, light and carefree, as if he hadn't just dismissed me from dinner with a wave of his hand, like I was nothing more than a servant who'd overstayed her welcome. 5 years. 5 years of this, and still, the sting of invisibility burned just as sharp as it had on our wedding night. The silk of my gown felt heavy against my skin, suffocating. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, watching my breath fog the surface. Down below, Aldrich threw his head back at something Lady Margot said, and I felt my wolf stir restlessly inside me, a low whine of loneliness that echoed through my entire being. She'd been dying slowly, my wolf, withering like a flower deprived of sunlight. An alpha female needs connection, needs pack, needs purpose. I had none of those things. I was Queen Rhiannon Emberwood in title only, a decorative piece of furniture that smiled at ambassadors, nodded at council meetings, and slept alone in chambers that might as well have been a gilded cage. I was 28 years old. I'd been 23 when I married Aldrich Thornridge, king of the British Wolf Territories, in a political alliance that united the Emberwood and Thornridge bloodlines. I'd worn my mother's wedding crown, heavy with ancient sapphires, and I'd believed, gods, how naive I'd been, that duty might eventually bloom into affection, that cold formality might thaw into warmth, that the distance in his eyes might close. It never did. The marriage was never consummated. He came to my chambers on our wedding night, stared at me for a long moment, as if I were a puzzle he couldn't solve, then turned and left. Tomorrow, he'd said. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Months became years. The court whispered that I was barren, frigid, undesirable. The Ice Queen, they called me. They didn't know that their king had never once touched me with anything resembling desire. I turned from the window, unable to watch him smile at other women any longer. The chambers felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. I needed to move, to breathe, to do something other than stand here and slowly crumble into dust. The castle corridors were quiet as I descended the main staircase, my slippers silent on the stone. Servants pressed themselves against walls as I passed, bowing, but I could feel their eyes on me, pitying, judging, curious. I held my head high, because that's what queens do, even when everything inside them is screaming. The gardens beckoned. I slipped through the side entrance, grateful for the cool night air that kissed my flushed cheeks. The scent of roses hung heavy and sweet, almost cloying. My wolf pushed at my consciousness, wanting to shift, wanting to run wild through the forests beyond the castle walls. But queens don't shift and run through the night like common wolves. Queens maintain decorum. Queens stay in their designated spaces. Queens die quietly of loneliness while everyone watches and does nothing. I walked the stone path between the rose bushes, letting my fingers trail over the soft petals. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the gardens. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the guards changing shifts, their armor clinking. The normal sounds of the castle at night, sounds that should have been comforting but only emphasized how alone I truly was. That's when I heard the voices, low, intimate, coming from the direction of the stables. A woman's laugh, breathy and pleased, a man's deeper rumble in response. I should have turned back, should have returned to my chambers and pretended I'd heard nothing. But something, masochism perhaps, or just the final thread of hope that needed to break, pulled me forward. I pressed myself against the wall of the stable, peering around the corner. The scene before me was illuminated by a single lantern hanging from a hook. King Aldrich had Lady Margot pressed against the stable wall, his mouth on her neck, his hands tangled in her blonde hair. She was gasping, arching into him, and he was touching her with a passion, a hunger, a desperate need that he'd never once shown me. The pain was physical. It struck my chest like a blade, sharp and cold and absolute. My wolf howled inside me, a sound of pure anguish that thankfully only I could hear. I watched for 3 seconds, 3 eternal seconds, where I saw with perfect clarity what I would never have, what he would never give me, what I wasn't to him and never would be. Then I turned and ran, my vision blurred. I told myself it was from the speed, from the night air, from anything other than the tears that burned behind my eyes but refused to fall. Queens don't cry. Queens don't break. Queens endure. I reached the stone staircase that led to the east wing, to my chambers, to my beautiful prison. My feet caught on the hem of my gown. I stumbled, pitching forward, hands grasping at empty air. The stone steps rushed up to meet me, and I had one crystal-clear thought. At least this will be quick. Then arms caught me. Strong arms, steady and sure, pulling me back from the fall, hauling me against a solid chest. I gasped, hands clutching at fabric, and the world exploded. The mate bond hit me like lightning strike, like wildfire, like every star in the sky collapsing inward at once. It burned through every nerve, every cell, every piece of me that had been cold and numb for 5 years. My wolf surged to the surface with a force that stole my breath, howling in recognition, in joy, in absolute certainty. The scent hit me next. Pine forests after winter rain, steel heated in forge fire, mountain snow under moonlight, clean and sharp and utterly intoxicating. I'd never smelled anyone like this. Couldn't smell anyone like this except mate, mine, ours, forever. My wolf sang it like a prayer, like a promise, like the only truth that had ever mattered. I looked up. Garrett Winterfang stared down at me with eyes gone wide with shock. Amber irises burning gold in the moonlight. The guard commander, the legend. The man who led 900 warriors with unshakable loyalty, who'd won 12 battles before his 30th birthday, who was so far above my station and yet so far below it that the distance should have been impossible to bridge. His arms were still around me. I was pressed against his chest, could feel his heart hammering against my palm, his scent wrapped around me like a blanket, like a homecoming, like everything I'd been starving for without knowing it. For 3 heartbeats we were frozen. His face was inches from mine, close enough that I could see the silver scar that cut through his left eyebrow, could count each individual eyelash, could watch his pupils dilate as the bond hit him too. I knew the moment it did because he made a sound low in his throat, almost a growl, and his arms tightened around me reflexively. The bond sang between us. I could almost see it, golden threads weaving back and forth, pulling, connecting, binding. Ancient magic that the moon goddess herself had woven into our DNA, recognizing what we were to each other, what we'd always been meant to be, my mate, and it was impossible. I jerked away from him like he'd burned me, stumbling back against the stone wall. My heart was trying to beat out of my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the bond stretching between us, elastic and insistent, demanding I return to his arms where I belonged. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was rough, strained. "Are you hurt?" Such proper words, such careful distance, while the mate bond screamed between us loud enough to wake the dead. "I'm fine." My voice came out barely a whisper. "Thank you, Commander. I must go." I fled, ran up the stairs like wolves were chasing me, though the only wolf that mattered was locked inside my own chest, howling for me to go back, to claim what was ours, to damn the consequences. I reached my chambers, slammed the door behind me, turned the lock with shaking hands. Then I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, hand pressed over my heart where something had just awakened after 5 years of hibernation. Something fierce and wild and absolutely certain. The tears came then, not the quiet, dignified tears of a queen, ugly, gasping sobs that tore from my throat, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of devastating, impossible recognition. I'd found my mate. He was the guard commander, a warrior, a common soldier elevated by skill and loyalty, but still so far beneath a queen in station that even speaking to him informally would cause scandal. And I was married to a king who'd never wanted me, bound by vows and duty and 5 years of trying to be perfect, trying to be enough, trying to earn affection that would never come. The mate bond didn't care about any of that. It burned in my chest, warm and insistent, a compass pointing toward Garrett Winterfang no matter how much I tried to ignore it. I could feel him even now, sense his presence somewhere in the castle. The bond was new, raw, but already it was the strongest thing I'd ever felt. My wolf paced inside me, restless and alive in a way she hadn't been in years. She knew. She'd recognized him instantly, and she wanted to go back, to claim, to mark, to bind ourselves to him in every way that mattered. But I was Queen Rhiannon Emberwood, and he was impossible. I must have sat there for an hour, maybe more, while the bond settled into my bones like roots growing deep. Eventually, the tears stopped. The shaking subsided. I stood on trembling legs and walked to my bed, still wearing my gown, not bothering to call for my ladies to help me undress. I just wanted to be alone with this terrible, beautiful knowledge. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw amber eyes looking down at me, felt strong arms holding me safe, smelled pine and steel and snow. Somewhere in the castle, Garrett Winterfang wasn't sleeping either. I knew it with the certainty the bond provided. I could feel his turmoil matching my own, his confusion, his desire, his absolute certainty warring with impossible circumstances. Dawn came slowly. I watched the sky lighten from my window, watched the stars fade one by one. I'd made no decisions, formed no plans. I only knew that everything had changed in the space of 3 heartbeats, and there was no going back to who I'd been before I fell into Garrett Winterfang's arms. The first scream pierced the quiet morning, then another, and another. Shouts from the courtyard, the clatter of armor, running footsteps in the corridors outside my chambers. My heart leaped into my throat. Attack? Invasion? I ran to the window, pulled aside the heavy curtains, and looked down into the courtyard. My heart stopped completely. 900 warriors in perfect battle formation, all in full armor, the metal gleaming in the early morning sun like a sea of silver and steel. But they weren't standing. They were kneeling, every single one of them, kneeling in the dewy grass, facing my window. And at the front of the formation, without armor, wearing only a simple linen tunic that showed the strong lines of his body, his black hair loose and wild in the morning breeze, Garrett Winterfang, on his knees, waiting. The message was unmistakable, undeniable, devastating in its clarity. They'd chosen, all of them. 900 of the kingdom's finest warriors, led by their commander, had chosen their side, and it wasn't the king's, it was mine. My hands shook so violently that I couldn't fasten the clasps of my gown. The emerald silk kept slipping through my fingers, and I finally gave up, pressing my palms flat against the dressing table to steady myself. In the mirror, my reflection looked like a stranger, hair wild from a sleepless night, eyes too bright, cheeks flushed with something that wasn't entirely fear. "Your Majesty." Alara's voice was barely above a whisper as she slipped into my chambers without knocking, closing the door quickly behind her. My lady-in-waiting was pale, her usually steady hands trembling as she reached to help me with the gown. "The entire castle is in chaos. The king has convened an emergency council. There are guards everywhere." "What are they saying?" I asked, though I could feel the answer thrumming through the mate bond that connected me to Garrett. He was still out there, still kneeling with his men, and I could sense his absolute calm in the face of whatever storm was coming. That Commander Winterfang has staged a coup, that he's enchanted you with dark magic, that the warriors have gone mad. Alara's fingers worked quickly at my clasps, her voice dropping even lower. "The king's personal guard has surrounded the courtyard, but no one dares attack. It would be a massacre, Your Majesty. 900 against maybe 200, and everyone knows Winterfang's men are the finest warriors in the kingdom." I closed my eyes, feeling the bond pulse with warmth in my chest. Not dark magic, the opposite, the most sacred magic that existed, the moon goddess's own gift to her children. But try explaining that to a court that had forgotten what true mate bonds looked like, a court that had made marriages of politics and convenience for so long that destiny itself had become foreign. "Help me dress," I said quietly. "Something simple. I won't go before the council looking weak." Alara chose a deep burgundy gown, high-necked and severe, with my hair pulled back in a coronet braid that made me look older, harder. When she finished, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. There was steel in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday, a certainty in the set of her jaw. 5 years of silence were about to end. The walk to the great hall felt endless. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as I passed, their eyes wide. I could hear the whispers following in my wake like ghosts, some pitying, some scandalized, some, and these surprised me most, approving. I kept my spine straight, my steps measured, even as my heart hammered against my ribs hard enough to hurt. The doors to the great hall stood open. I could see the assembled nobles inside, a sea of rich fabrics and anxious faces. The moment I appeared in the doorway, a hush fell over the room so complete that I could hear the torches crackling in their sconces. Then the nobles began to part. They moved away from me as if I carried plague, creating a wide corridor straight to the throne where Aldrich sat. Their faces ranged from horrified to fascinated to coldly calculating. Lord Pemberton actually pulled his daughter behind him as I passed, as if I might contaminate her with my scandal. I walked through them with my head high, and something wild and fierce unfurled in my chest. My wolf, silent and dormant for so long, was awake now, alert, ready. I could feel her power flooding through me, alpha strength that I'd suppressed for 5 years, because queens were supposed to be soft, decorative, controllable. I was done being controllable. Aldrich sat on his throne like a king from old paintings, all rigid authority and barely contained rage. His face was red, a vein pulsing at his temple. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. When our eyes met, I saw something in his gaze that I'd been too blind, too desperate, too hopeful to see before. Contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt. Not anger at being defied. Not hurt at potential betrayal. Just disgust. As if I were something distasteful he'd stepped in and couldn't quite scrape off his boot. He'd always despised me. From the very beginning. Every smile had been false. Every kind word calculated. Every moment of our marriage a performance for a court that expected royal unity. And I'd been so starved for affection that I'd mistaken his tolerance for the possibility of eventual love. What a fool I'd been. Explain yourself. His voice rang through the hall, imperious and cold. Explain this treason. I stopped at the base of the dais, meeting his gaze without flinching. Around us, the nobles held their collective breath. I could feel Garrett through the bond, closer now, being brought here, and the warmth of his presence gave me courage I didn't know I possessed. I have committed no treason, Your Majesty. My voice came out steady, clear. I have done nothing but exist. His eyes narrowed. Your guard commander stages a military display outside your window with 900 armed men, and you claim innocence? Do you think me a fool? I think, I said carefully, that you see conspiracy where there is only truth. Before he could respond, the side doors opened. Guards entered, and between them, in chains, walked Garrett Winterfang. The chains were symbolic. I could see that immediately. Heavy iron shackles around his wrists, connected by a thick chain that rattled with each step. But Garrett could have broken them as easily as snapping twigs. The guards knew it too. They kept their distance, hands on their sword hilts, eyes wary. Garrett's gaze found mine immediately. The mate bond flared so brightly between us that I gasped, actually stumbling back a step. I could feel his emotions washing over me. Concern for my safety, rage at being separated from me, and underneath it all, an absolutely certainty that somehow, some way, we would survive this. The guards forced him to his knees before the throne. The chains rattled as they hit the stone floor. Garrett knelt with his head high, no submission in his posture despite the position. Commander Winterfang. Aldrich's voice dripped with false courtesy. You will confess your conspiracy to overthrow your rightful king. Garrett's amber eyes never left mine for a moment. When he finally looked up at Aldrich, there was no fear in his expression, only calm certainty. I have conspired against no one, Your Majesty. I recognized my mate. It is the sacred right, granted by the moon goddess herself. The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, exclamations of shock rippled through the assembled nobles like waves. I heard Lady Pemberton's scandalized shriek, Lord Ashford's bark of disbelieving laughter. The whispers rose to a roar. Mate bond, impossible, the queen, a common soldier, blasphemy, destiny, scandal. Aldrich stood abruptly, and the hall fell silent. He descended the dais steps slowly, deliberately, until he stood before Garrett. The king was a tall man, but Garrett was taller. Even kneeling, he met Aldrich's gaze without flinching. A mate bond. Aldrich's laugh was cruel, cutting. You dare claim a mate bond with the queen? You, a common soldier elevated by skill but still baseborn? She is queen of the British territories, daughter of the ancient Emberwood line. There can be no mate bond across such a gulf. The moon goddess does not make such errors. The moon goddess makes no errors at all, Garrett said quietly. Only we do, when we ignore her gifts. Aldrich's face went purple. Treason. This is high treason. Conspiracy to seduce the queen. An attempt to undermine the throne through claims of false mate bonds. The penalty is death. Something inside me snapped. 5 years. 5 years of smiling while he paraded mistresses through the castle. 5 years of sleeping alone while he warmed other beds. 5 years of whispers that I was inadequate, barren, cold. 5 years of dying slowly in a marriage that was a beautiful lie. 5 years of silence. No. My voice cut through the hall like a blade. Every head turned toward me. Aldrich's eyes widened in shock. I had never contradicted him publicly, never questioned his judgment, never spoken out of turn in all our years of marriage. I stepped forward, and something must have shown in my face, in my posture, because the guards between me and Garrett actually backed away. I felt power radiating from me, alpha energy that I'd kept locked down for so long finally breaking free. My wolf surged to the surface, and I knew my eyes must be glowing with her presence. I walked past Aldrich as if he didn't exist, walked straight to where Garrett knelt in chains, and I touched his face. The mate bond exploded between us with visible force. Golden sparks like lightning frozen in honey arced between my fingers and his skin. The hall gasped collectively. The bond was visible to everyone now, undeniable proof that what Garrett claimed was true. The moon goddess herself was manifesting her will for all to see. Garrett's eyes closed at my touch, and I felt through the bond what it meant to him. Relief, joy, absolute devotion. The knowledge that whatever came next, we would face it together. I turned to face Aldrich, my hand still on Garrett's cheek, the golden sparks still dancing between us. You condemned me to a dead marriage. My voice rang through the hall, and it no longer sounded like the quiet queen they all knew. It sounded like an alpha in her full power. 5 years, Aldrich. 5 years where you never touched me, never spoke to me with anything but cold courtesy, never treated me as anything more than a decorative piece of furniture to parade before foreign dignitaries. You humiliated me in front of the entire court, took mistresses openly while I sat alone in chambers that might as well have been a prison cell. His face had gone from purple to white. Around us, the nobles were absolutely silent, hanging on every word. And now, when the moon goddess herself grants me what you denied me, a true mate, a real bond, actual love, you call it treason? I laughed, and it was not a kind sound. The mate bond is sacred. It is the will of the goddess made manifest. To interfere with it is blasphemy of the highest order. You forget yourself, Aldrich hissed. You are my wife, in name only. The words echoed off the stone walls. A marriage never consummated, a bond never honored. You know this as well as I do. What we have is a political contract, nothing more. And I will not allow you to execute my true mate to preserve the fiction we've been living. You dare threaten me? I stepped forward, away from Garrett, until I was face to face with the king. The golden sparks of the mate bond still danced around me, visible proof of divine favor. I dare tell you the truth. If you order Garrett Winterfang's death, you declare war not just on me, but on 900 of your finest warriors, on the sacred laws of our people, on the moon goddess herself, and you will lose. For a long moment, Aldrich stared at me. I saw rage there, yes, but also calculation. He was weighing options, considering consequences. Around us, the court held its breath. Then the great doors of the hall opened. 900 warriors entered in perfect formation, their boots striking the stone floor in unison like thunder. They didn't draw weapons, didn't make threats. They simply marched into the hall in rows of 10, filling the space behind me, and as one, they knelt, not to Aldrich, to me. The silence was absolute. Even Aldrich seemed frozen, staring at the sea of armored men all facing me with their fists over their hearts in the ancient gesture of loyalty to a true alpha. Your Majesty. A quavering voice from the crowd of nobles. Old Councillor Marcus stepped forward, his weathered face grave. He'd served Aldrich's father before him, had been loyal to the Thornridge line for 40 years. If I may speak? Aldrich nodded stiffly, unable to tear his eyes from the kneeling warriors. Marcus cleared his throat. The ancient laws are clear. When a true mate bond is recognized, it is the will of the moon goddess herself. To interfere with such a bond is not merely illegal, it is blasphemy. The sacred texts state, what the goddess has joined, no mortal hand may sunder. To stand between mates is to stand against the divine will, and such presumption invites her wrath upon the land. He paused, looking at Aldrich with something like pity. Your Majesty cannot order the execution of Commander Winterfang for claiming his sacred mate right without defying the very foundation of our faith. The people would see it as an attack on the moon goddess herself. The consequences would be severe. I watched Aldrich's face as he realized the trap closing around him. He'd painted himself into a corner with his rage, his pride, his need to punish me for finally defying him. But Marcus was right. Our religion, our culture, our very identity as wolf shifters, was built on the sanctity of mate bonds. To execute someone for recognizing their mate would be unforgivable in the eyes of every citizen in the kingdom. His jaw clenched, his hands flexed. I could practically see him running through options, looking for a way out that didn't end in either civil war or loss of face. "Very well," he said finally, voice tight with suppressed fury. "I will not order immediate execution. The council will deliberate on this situation and determine the appropriate course of action." He turned to me, and his eyes were cold as winter. "But until we have reached a decision, you and the commander will be separated. You, my dear wife, will be confined to your chambers under guard. He will be imprisoned in the tower. You will have no contact. Is that clear?" It wasn't a question. It was the only compromise his pride would allow. I glanced at Garrett, still kneeling in his chains. Our eyes met, and I felt the bond pulse between us. No words needed. I could feel his emotions as clearly as if he'd spoken them aloud. "I'll wait. I'll always wait. I'm yours." And beneath that, another promise. "We'll find a way. Together." "Perfectly clear, Your Majesty," I said. Guards moved forward to take Garrett. He stood with fluid grace despite the chains, his eyes never leaving mine. As they led him toward the tower stairs, he looked back once. The mate bond stretched between us like a golden thread, and I held onto it like a lifeline. The nobles parted to let me pass as I left the hall. Some looked scandalized, some sympathetic, some calculating, already planning how to use this scandal to their advantage. I didn't care about any of them. Ilara was waiting outside my chambers. She helped me inside without a word, and I heard the guards take position outside my door. Locked in, a prisoner, in all but name. But as I sank onto my bed, hand pressed over my heart where the mate bond burned warm and constant, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel Garrett through the bond, even separated by stone walls and locked doors. His presence was constant, steady, like a heartbeat synchronized with my own. I could sense him in the tower, could feel that he was unharmed, could practically hear his silent reassurance washing over me. We would find a way. The moon goddess had brought us together for a reason, and after 5 years of quiet suffering, I was done being the obedient queen who accepted whatever scraps she was given. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the courtyard where 900 warriors had knelt for me. Not because I was queen, but because I was Garrett's mate, and in recognizing our bond, I'd shown more courage than Aldrich had in his entire reign. For the first time since I'd married into this gilded cage, I began to plan my escape. Not just physically, but completely, totally, irrevocably. The Ice Queen was melting, and what emerged from beneath would burn this whole corrupted court to the ground if necessary. Through the bond, I felt Garrett's surge of fierce approval, and I smiled. 3 days passed in my chambers like 3 years. The first day, I paced until my feet ached, feeling Garrett's presence through the mate bond like a constant warmth in my chest. The second day, I sat by the window and watched the courtyard, seeing the servants whisper, the guards shift nervously, the whole castle holding its breath waiting for the council's decision. By the third day, I'd stopped pacing and started thinking with a clarity I hadn't possessed in years. Ilara became my lifeline to the outside world. She moved through the castle freely, her position as my lady-in-waiting, making her invisible to those who mattered. She brought me meals I barely touched, helped me dress though I had nowhere to go, and most importantly, she brought me information. "The court is divided," she whispered on the second evening, brushing my hair with gentle strokes. "Lord Ashford and his faction support the king. They say tradition and order must be maintained, that allowing a queen to defy her husband sets dangerous precedent. But others," she paused, meeting my eyes in the mirror, "others are whispering that the mate bond is sacred, that King Aldrich has been cruel to you for years, that everyone has seen it, but no one dared speak." I absorbed this information silently. The bond pulsed in my chest, and I could feel Garrett in the tower, alert and waiting. I sent calm reassurance through the connection, though I felt anything but calm. "Lady Pemberton told her daughter that you showed remarkable courage," Ilara continued softly. "Several of the younger nobles are calling you brave. Even some of the older ones admit that your marriage has been difficult. Difficult. What a delicate word for 5 years of slowly dying inside a gilded cage. On the third night, I was sitting by the fire when Ilara burst into my chambers. Her face was pale as milk, her hands trembling as she locked the door behind her. The guards outside didn't even turn. They were used to her coming and going. "Your Majesty," she breathed, kneeling before me. "I've heard something. Rumors from the kitchen staff, confirmed by one of the stable boys who just returned from a supply run to the northern villages." I set down the book I'd been pretending to read. "What rumors?" "King Aldrich has a mistress." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Not Lady Margot or any of the court ladies. A secret one. In a village 3 days' ride from here. And there's more. They say she's given him children." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the arms of my chair, my mind racing. Children? 2 boys, from what the stable boy heard. He was making a delivery to that village, and saw the king's personal seal on payments to a small cottage. When he asked the innkeeper about it, the man clammed up immediately, but the serving girl whispered that everyone in the village knows the king keeps a woman there. Pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. His coldness toward me, his refusal to consummate our marriage, the way he looked at me sometimes, not with desire or even dislike, but with guilt, not because I was inadequate, because he already had what I desperately wanted, a true mate, a real love, a family. While I withered alone, he'd been living the life he'd denied me. "Find out everything," I said, my voice deadly calm despite the rage building in my chest. "I need confirmation. Names, dates, evidence. Can you do that?" Ilara's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, if I'm caught, you won't be. You're clever, and people underestimate servants." I gripped her hands. "This could change everything. Please." She nodded slowly. "I have a cousin who works in the king's personal accounts, and the stable boy, his sister lives in that village. I can get answers. Go. Be careful. And tell no one." She left before dawn the next morning, claiming she was visiting her sick mother. I spent the next 2 days in an agony of waiting, feeling the bond stretch thin as Garrett's concern grew. He could sense my turmoil, though he didn't know its source. I pushed determination back through the connection, trying to tell him without words. "Trust me. I'm planning something. Wait for me." His response was immediate and warm. "Always. I'm yours. I'll wait forever." When Ilara finally returned on the evening of the 5th day of my confinement, she looked exhausted but triumphant. She slipped into my chambers after the guards changed shift, carrying a small leather satchel. "I have everything," she whispered. We sat by the fire, and she spread the evidence before me like cards in a deadly game. A letter from the king's treasurer, showing monthly payments to a cottage in the village of Ashbrook. Testimony she'd written down from 3 different villagers, all confirming the same story. And most damning of all, a letter, sealed with Aldrich's personal crest, that she'd stolen from a messenger. "The messenger was drunk at the inn," Ilara explained. "He fell asleep at his table. I just took it from his bag and replaced it with a blank parchment of the same weight. He'll never know until he delivers it." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Aldrich's handwriting was unmistakable. Bold, confident strokes that I'd seen on royal decrees 1,000 times. "My dearest Brenna," it began, and my heart clenched. Dearest. A term of affection he'd never once used with me. I forced myself to keep reading. The letter was filled with passion, with longing, with promises. He wrote about missing her touch, about how the boys were growing, about his plans to eventually, somehow, make their relationship public. He apologized profusely for having to maintain his marriage to me, called it a necessary political arrangement, promised that one day they would be together openly. "You are my only true love," he'd written. "My fated mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. These years of pretending, of living apart, are torture, but I must maintain appearances for the stability of the kingdom. Soon, my love, soon we'll find a way to be together, as we were meant to be." The hypocrisy was staggering. It burned through me like acid, eating away the last remnants of the loyalty I'd felt toward him, toward our marriage, toward the duty that had chained me for 5 years. He'd had his mate bond all along, had been living his secret happiness while condemning me to loneliness, had fathered children with his true love, while the court whispered that I was barren. And now, when I'd finally found my own mate, he'd been ready to execute Garrett for claiming the same sacred right he'd exercised in secret. The rage that filled me wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, calculated, sharp as a blade. I wasn't just going to escape this marriage. I was going to dismantle his entire edifice of lies. "Ilara," I said quietly, "I need you to do one more thing. Bring Counselor Marcus to me, secretly, tonight." She paled. "Your Majesty, he's the king's most loyal. He's loyal to the law, I interrupted, to the ancient traditions, to justice, and what I'm about to show him will prove that King Aldrich has violated every sacred law he claims to uphold. Marcus came near midnight, slipping into my chambers with his hood up, looking nervous and confused. He was an old man, 70 if he was a day, bent with age but with sharp eyes that had witnessed decades of court politics. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this is highly irregular. If the king discovers I'm here—" "Sit down, Marcus." I gestured to the chair across from me. "What I'm about to show you supersedes any loyalty you owe to Aldrich Thornridge." I laid out the evidence methodically, the financial records, the testimonies, and finally, the letter. I watched his face grow paler with each revelation, saw his hands begin to shake as he read Aldrich's passionate words to his secret mate. "Moon goddess preserve us," he whispered. "He has a fated mate, hidden all these years." While he looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine compassion in his eyes. "While he left you to suffer alone, while he condemned Commander Winterfang for the very thing he himself has been doing in secret. Worse than secret," I said quietly. "He built a life with her, had children, all while forcing me into a marriage that was nothing but a pretty lie for the court to admire." Marcus set down the letter with trembling hands. "This is catastrophic. If this becomes public knowledge, the scandal will destroy the throne's credibility. The people will riot. A king who lives in blasphemous hypocrisy while condemning others for following the moon goddess's will." He shook his head. "Your Majesty, what do you intend to do with this information?" "I intend to present it to the full council," I said calmly. "Tomorrow. I want everyone assembled. All the nobles, all the counselors, the high priest. I want them to see the truth of what their king has been doing while playing the righteous judge. He'll deny it. He'll claim the documents are forgeries. Then let him explain the villagers who know his face. Let him explain the payments from his personal treasury. Let him explain his own handwriting, his own seal." I leaned forward. "Marcus, you know the ancient laws better than anyone. A mate bond is sacred. To interfere with one is blasphemy. Aldrich has been living his own mate bond in secret while threatening to execute my mate for acknowledging ours. That's not just hypocrisy. It's a violation of every law he swore to uphold." The old counselor was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation. "You're right. This is justice, terrible as it may be. I'll arrange the council meeting for tomorrow afternoon. The king won't be able to refuse. I'll cite the urgency of resolving the situation with Commander Winterfang and his 900 men still camped outside." After he left, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling Garrett's presence steady and strong through the mate bond. He knew something was coming. I could feel his readiness, his absolute trust in me. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the night, to him, to the moon goddess herself. "Tomorrow we end this." The great hall was packed when I entered the next afternoon. Every noble family had sent representatives. The full council sat in their designated seats. The high priest stood near the throne in his ceremonial robes, looking grave. And on the throne itself, Aldrich sat with the arrogance of a man who believed he still controlled the situation. His eyes narrowed when he saw me walk in unescorted, head high, wearing not the submissive burgundy, but a gown of deep silver blue that made my eyes look like ice. I'd had Alara braid my hair in a warrior style, severe and uncompromising. I wasn't coming as a repentant wife. I was coming as an alpha queen ready for battle. "The council recognizes Queen Rhiannon," Marcus announced formally. "She has requested to present evidence relevant to the matter currently under deliberation." I walked to the center of the hall, not up to the throne. I stood where everyone could see me, where my voice would carry to every corner. "Honored council, assembled nobles, high priest," I began. "For 5 days, I have been confined to my chambers, while you deliberated on whether Commander Winterfang should die for recognizing his fated mate. Me. I have been judged, condemned, and imprisoned for the crime of accepting what the moon goddess granted." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Aldrich's jaw clenched. "But I have discovered something during my confinement that changes everything." I gestured to Alara, who stepped forward with the leather satchel. "I have evidence that King Aldrich has been living a lie for years. A lie that makes his judgment of me and Commander Winterfang not just unfair, but catastrophically hypocritical." I pulled out the financial records first. "These are payment records from the king's personal treasury, signed by his treasurer. showing monthly funds sent to a cottage in the village of Ashbrook. Substantial funds, enough to support a family in comfort. I handed them to Marcus, who passed them along the council table. Nobles leaned forward, whispers growing louder. Next came the written testimonies. These are statements from 3 villagers in Ashbrook, all confirming the same thing. King Aldrich maintains a secret household there, a cottage where an Omega woman named Brenna lives with 2 young boys, aged 4 and 6. Boys who have the king's black hair and blue eyes, boys who call him father when he visits. The hall exploded in shocked exclamations. Aldrich shot to his feet. "This is slander! Lies fabricated by a desperate woman! Then explain this." I held up the letter, his seal clearly visible. "This is your own handwriting, Your Majesty. Your own words. Shall I read them aloud, or would you prefer to confirm their contents privately?" His face went white, then red. For a moment I thought he might lunge at me, but Marcus stood, his old voice cutting through the chaos. "Your Majesty, is this your seal?" Aldrich's hands clenched into fists. He could deny everything else, but his own seal, his own hand, those were irrefutable. I watched him realize he was trapped, watched the calculations running behind his eyes as he searched for an escape route that didn't exist. "Yes," he finally spat, "that is my seal." The hall fell silent. "And is it true," the high priest asked quietly, "that you have maintained this relationship for years while married to Queen Rhiannon?" Aldrich's face contorted with rage and something else, desperation. When he finally spoke, his voice shook with suppressed emotion. Yes, it's true. Brenna is my fated mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself years before my marriage was arranged. But I was forced by duty, by politics, by the demands of this cursed throne, to marry Rhiannon Emberwood for her bloodline and her family's alliance. I did my duty. I gave up my happiness for this kingdom, but I refused to give up the woman the goddess chose for me completely. So yes, I kept her in secret. I provided for her and our sons, because I deserved some measure of happiness in this prison of crown and duty. The silence that followed was absolute. I let it stretch, let his words hang in the air like poison. Then I spoke, my voice cutting and cold as winter. You deserved happiness, but I didn't. Every eye turned to me. You lived your true love in secret, visited your mate and children whenever you wished, wrote her passionate letters about your devotion. And me? You condemned me to a marriage that was nothing but a cage. You never touched me, never spoke to me with kindness, never gave me any hope that I might one day mean something to you. You let the court whisper that I was barren, cold, inadequate, when the truth was you'd simply locked me away while you lived the life you denied me. My voice rose, filling the hall. And now, when the moon goddess finally grants me the same gift she granted you, a true mate, a real bond, actual love, you call it treason. You order his execution. You imprison me for accepting what you yourself have been living in secret for years. I turned to address the entire council. This isn't justice. This is tyranny. A king who violates the very laws he enforces on others. A hypocrite who lives in blasphemy while condemning those who follow the moon goddess's will. The council erupted in arguments. Nobles shouted over each other. The high priest looked stricken, and Aldrich stood there, exposed, his secret life laid bare for all to judge. Marcus rose, his voice somehow cutting through the chaos. The law is clear. When a true mate bond is recognized, it is sacred. To interfere is blasphemy. King Aldrich himself has proven this. He maintained his own mate bond despite his marriage because it was his divine right. Queen Rhiannon has the same right. He pulled out an ancient tome, opening it to a marked page. By the laws established at the founding of our kingdom, any marriage that remains unconsummated after 1 year may be annulled if one party discovers their true mate. Queen Rhiannon's marriage has never been consummated. She has discovered her fated mate. By law, she has the right to dissolve this union and claim her true bond. The high priest nodded slowly. The law is indeed clear, and the moon goddess's will cannot be denied without inviting her wrath upon our land. Aldrich looked around the hall, seeing the tide turning against him, his support crumbling, his hypocrisy too stark to defend. Fine, he said finally, voice tight with barely controlled rage. She may have her annulment. She may leave with her precious commander. But I have conditions. You're in no position to make demands, I said quietly. I am still king, he roared, and I will not have her remain here, a constant reminder of this humiliation. You want your freedom, Rhiannon? Then take it. But you renounce your title as queen. You leave this castle and never return. You will have no claim to anything here. No property. No wealth beyond what you brought to the marriage. You and Winterfang will depart, and you will not darken these halls again. I smiled. For the first time in 5 years, I smiled at King Aldrich with genuine feeling. I accept. He blinked, clearly having expected me to fight for the crown, for the wealth, for the position. He didn't understand that he was offering me exactly what I wanted. The throne had never been anything but a prison. The title had never been anything but a chain. Very well, Marcus said formally. Let it be recorded that on this day, the marriage between King Aldrich Thornridge and Rhiannon Emberwood is dissolved by mutual consent, with the blessing of the moon goddess through the discovery of true mate bonds. Queen Rhiannon relinquishes her title and all claims to the throne. Commander Garrett Winterfang is absolved of all charges. They are free to depart in peace. I turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Your Majesty. You might want to bring Brenna and your sons to the castle now. Your secret is out. You might as well stop living the lie. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of that hall with my head high, feeling lighter with every step, the mate bond singing in my chest as I headed toward the tower where they'd kept Garrett imprisoned. I was done being queen of a loveless kingdom. I was ready to become something far more powerful. Myself. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Running footsteps echoing through the stone corridors, fast and desperate. And then the library door burst open, and Garrett was there. We collided in the center of the room, his arms wrapping around me so tightly I couldn't breathe, and I didn't care. The mate bond exploded between us after 5 days of forced separation, singing through every nerve in my body with a force that was almost painful in its intensity. I buried my face against his chest, breathing in his scent, pine and steel and snow, and felt something inside me that had been twisted tight finally loosen. Rhiannon. His voice was rough, broken. His hands moved over my back, my shoulders, my hair, as if he needed to confirm I was real, whole, unharmed. Tell me it's true. Tell me you're free. I pulled back just enough to look up at him. His amber eyes were wet, his face etched with days of worry and rage and helplessness. I touched his cheek, feeling the stubble rough against my palm, and smiled through my own tears. We're free, I whispered. Both of us. Completely free. He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, then kissed me. Not gentle, not careful. Desperate and claiming and full of 5 days of separation that had felt like 5 years. The bond roared between us, golden and fierce. And for the first time since I'd fallen into his arms on those garden stairs, I let myself feel it fully. Let it consume me. Let myself be his completely. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against mine. What did you do? I played the game better than Aldrich ever could, I said simply. Now come, we have a castle to leave behind. The preparations took only hours. I had so little I wanted to take with me. Most of the gowns, the jewels, the trappings of queenship felt like costumes from a play I no longer had to perform. Alara helped me pack a single trunk with practical traveling clothes, warm cloaks, and the few personal items that actually mattered. My mother's locket, the hunting knife my father had given me when I turned 16, a book of poetry that had kept me sane through long, lonely nights. The formal renunciation ceremony was held in the throne room at sunset. I walked in wearing the silver-blue gown I'd worn to the council, my hair still in its warrior's braid. Marcus read the official decree, while scribes recorded every word. When he was finished, I stepped forward and removed my crown for the last time. The weight of it leaving my head was physical relief. I'd worn that crown for 5 years, and I'd never realized how heavy it truly was until I set it down on the velvet cushion and felt my neck straighten, my shoulders lift. I was lighter without it, freer. I, Rhiannon Emberwood, do hereby renounce all claims to the title of queen, all rights to the throne of the British territories, and all privileges attendant to the crown. My voice rang clear through the hall. I go forth as a free woman, bound only to my true mate and to the will of the moon goddess herself. No one applauded. Half the nobles looked scandalized, the other half uncertain. Aldrich wasn't even there. He'd retreated to his chambers immediately after the council meeting, and I didn't care enough to wonder what he was feeling. This wasn't about him anymore. I changed in my chambers one last time, Alara helping me into simple traveling leathers and a warm wool cloak. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked younger, fiercer, with wild hope in her eyes instead of carefully suppressed despair. "Are you sure you want to come?" I asked Alara softly. "You'll be giving up everything you know. Your position here, your family in the castle." "My family abandoned me when I was 10 and sick with fever," she interrupted quietly. "You took me in, treated me with kindness when I was just a serving girl. You gave me a purpose. So yes, your ma—" She caught herself. "Rhiannon, I'm sure. Where you go, I go." I hugged her tight. This woman who'd been my only real friend in 5 years of loneliness. The courtyard was filled with warriors when we descended. All 900 of them, assembled in perfect formation, their armor gleaming in the dying light. Garrett stood at their head, and when he saw me, his face transformed. No more prison pallor, no more chains, just my mate, powerful and free, waiting for me. He raised his hand, and the entire formation saluted. The sound of 900 fists striking 900 breastplates in unison echoed off the castle walls like thunder. "Men," Garrett called out, his commander's voice carrying across the courtyard. "You have served the British territories with honor and courage. Your duty to this kingdom is ended. I release you from your oaths to follow me. You are free to remain here, to find new positions, to return to your families. No shame will come to any man who chooses to stay." Silence. Not one man moved. Then the youngest warrior, a boy barely 20 named Thomas, who'd always had a kind smile for the servants, stepped forward. "With respect, Commander, we didn't swear our oaths to the kingdom. We swore them to you, and to her." He looked at me, dropping to one knee. "You're our true Alpha Queen. Where you lead, we follow." One by one, all 900 warriors knelt. The sound of their armor clinking as they went down was like music, like a benediction. I felt tears streaming down my face and didn't bother to wipe them away. "I never had a real family," I said, my voice breaking. "My parents arranged my marriage and died before seeing what it became. I had no siblings, no cousins who cared. But now," I looked across the sea of kneeling warriors, at Alara standing loyal at my side, at Garrett watching me with such fierce love it hurt. "Now I have 900 brothers willing to leave everything out of loyalty. I don't deserve you." "You deserve everything," Garrett said quietly, taking my hand, "and we choose to give it to you." We rode out as the last light faded from the sky. I sat astride a gray mare, Garrett on his black warhorse beside me, 900 mounted warriors behind us in perfect columns. I looked back once at the castle where I'd been prisoner for 5 years. The torches were being lit in the windows, making it glow like something from a fairy tale. Beautiful, cold, empty. I felt no sadness. Only relief, vast and liberating, like finally setting down a burden I'd carried too long. We rode north, following old roads that grew rougher the farther we traveled from the kingdom's heart. The first night, we camped in a clearing, and I slept under the stars for the first time in my life, wrapped in Garrett's arms with the mate bond humming between us like a lullaby. The second day brought rain, cold and cleansing, washing away the last traces of who I'd been. The third day, the landscape began to change. Wilder, more rugged, less touched by human hands. 3 weeks of riding brought us to the northern territories, not the frozen wastes beyond the kingdom's border, but a region of rolling hills and dense forests, rich land that belonged to no kingdom because it was too far from the centers of power to control easily. Small villages dotted the landscape, farming communities that paid taxes to whatever lord claimed them, but received little protection in return. Garrett and I stood on a hilltop, looking across the valley below. A river ran through it, silver in the afternoon sun. The land was fertile, defensible, beautiful. "We could build here," Garrett said quietly. "A settlement, farm the land, live in peace." I looked at the 900 warriors camped behind us, at the refugees who'd joined us on the road, families fleeing Aldrich's increasingly unstable rule, young people seeking adventure, craftsmen looking for new opportunities. In 3 weeks, our group had swollen to over 1,000 people. "No," I said slowly, an idea forming. "We won't just build, we'll conquer, not with violence, with vision. We'll create something that makes the old kingdoms look backwards and cruel by comparison. A place where mate bonds are celebrated, where merit matters more than birthright, where every voice has value." Garrett's eyes gleamed. "A new kingdom, our kingdom." We established our first settlement in the valley, using the warriors' engineering knowledge to build sturdy structures quickly. Word spread fast. There was a new settlement in the north, led by an alpha queen who defied a king and won, where anyone willing to work hard was welcome regardless of birth or status. People came. Families tired of crushing taxes, craftsmen seeking fair pay, women fleeing arranged marriages, omegas who'd been treated as lesser. By the end of the first month, we had 300 new arrivals. By the end of 3 months, the settlement had grown into a town. I worked alongside everyone else, helped raise walls, organized supply chains, adjudicated disputes. No crown, no throne, just me, doing the work, earning my place as leader through action rather than bloodline. And it felt right in a way ruling from that distant throne never had. Garrett trained warriors, organized defenses, and led patrols. But at night, he was just mine. We shared a simple wooden cabin, nothing like the opulent chambers I'd had as queen, and I'd never been happier. The mate bond had settled into something constant and warm, a connection that let me feel his presence even when we were apart, that made me whole in a way I'd never been before. News from the south came with traitors. Aldrich's kingdom was fracturing. The revelation about his secret family had destroyed his credibility. Nobles who'd supported him felt betrayed. Common people whispered about the true queen, who'd been treated cruelly and had left to build something better. There were rumors of revolts, of Aldrich growing increasingly paranoid and tyrannical. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, just a distant kind of pity. He'd been trapped too, in his own way, trapped by duty and tradition and the weight of a crown he'd never really wanted. I hoped he found peace with Brenna and his sons, hoped he could let go of power before it destroyed him completely. 6 months after we'd arrived in the north, on the night of the full moon, we held the formal mate bond ceremony, not in some grand cathedral with judgmental nobles watching, but in the center of our growing town, surrounded by people who actually cared about us. The 900 warriors formed a circle around us. Ilara stood as my witness, tears streaming down her face. The families we'd helped, the refugees we'd sheltered, the craftsmen who'd found purpose, they all gathered to celebrate, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Garrett wore simple leathers. I wore a white dress that one of the village seamstresses had made, embroidered with silver thread by a dozen willing hands. Nothing like the elaborate gowns I'd worn as queen. Just honest cloth made with honest labor by people who'd become friends. The town's eldest, a woman named Margaret who'd been a healer before joining us, performed the ceremony. She called upon the moon goddess to witness our union, spoke the ancient words about true mates and eternal bonds. Then Garrett pulled me close, tilted my head to expose my throat, and bit down. The pain was sharp and bright, but it lasted only a moment before transforming into something else entirely. Pleasure, connection, completion. The mate bond snapping into permanent place with a force that dropped me to my knees. I could feel him inside my mind now, not just his emotions, but his thoughts, his very essence intertwining with mine until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. My wolf surged forward, howling in triumph, finally whole after years of being half dead. I shifted partially, feeling my canines lengthen, and I marked Garrett in return. His blood on my tongue tasted like home, like destiny, like everything I'd ever wanted without knowing to want it. When we both shifted back to human form, still kneeling in the dirt with our arms around each other, the entire town erupted in cheers. The bond between us glowed so brightly that everyone could see it, golden threads weaving us together, visible proof of the moon goddess's blessing. 3 months later, I realized I was pregnant. I'd spent 5 years listening to court physicians whisper that I was barren, that my womb was cursed, that I would never bear an heir. They'd been wrong. I wasn't infertile. I'd just been dying slowly in a marriage that was a tomb, my body refusing to create life in a place where I had no life myself. With Garrett, with our bond, life flourished. I could feel it growing inside me, tiny and precious, and absolutely certain. Our child. The first child born to the Northern Kingdom, conceived in love instead of duty. When I told Garrett, he lifted me off the ground and spun me around, laughing with pure joy. Then he set me down gently, as if I might break, his hand going immediately to my still flat stomach with wonder in his eyes. "I'm going to be a father," he whispered, "and I'm going to be a mother." The word felt strange on my tongue. Not queen mother, ceremonial and distant, just mother, real and warm and terrifying and perfect. More news came from the south. Aldrich had abdicated, just walked away from the throne, leaving it to his younger brother while he took Brenna and their sons and disappeared to live quietly somewhere far from the politics that had consumed him. Part of me hoped he found happiness. He'd been cruel, yes, but he'd also been trapped. In the end, we'd both been freed from the same prison. Our kingdom grew. By the end of the first year, we had 4 towns and a central fortress. Nothing grand like Aldrich's castle, but strong and functional. We established a council where anyone could bring concerns, where decisions were made by consensus rather than royal decree. We made laws protecting mate bonds, guaranteeing rights regardless of designation, ensuring fair treatment for everyone. People called it revolutionary. I called it obvious. Why wouldn't you celebrate the moon goddess's greatest gift? Why wouldn't you value people for their abilities rather than their bloodlines? Why wouldn't you give everyone a voice? The neighboring kingdoms watched nervously. Some sent spies, trying to understand what we'd built. Others sent emissaries, testing whether we were threat or opportunity. When 3 kingdoms sent formal delegations requesting alliance meetings, I knew we'd succeeded. We weren't a ragtag group of rebels anymore. We were a legitimate power, and they wanted to negotiate as equals. I met with the emissaries in our great hall, not from a throne, but at a round table where everyone sat at the same level. I negotiated trade agreements, defense pacts, cultural exchanges, not as a supplicant begging for recognition, but as a leader offering partnership. The night after the final agreement was signed, I stood on the parapet of our fortress, wind whipping my hair, my hand resting on my swollen belly where our son kicked vigorously. 7 months pregnant, and I'd never felt stronger, more alive, more myself. Garrett came up behind me, wrapping his arms around me and resting his chin on my shoulder. His hand joined mine on my stomach, and I felt our son settle at the touch, as if recognizing his father even through skin and bone. "Any regrets?" Garrett asked softly. I laughed, the sound carrying on the wind. "Not one. I lost a crown of gold and gained a kingdom of truth. I lost a throne of lies and gained a seat at a table of equals. I lost everything I thought defined me and found out who I actually am." I leaned back against him, feeling the mate bond pulse between us, steady as a heartbeat. Below us, the town was settling for the night, lights glowing in windows, families gathering for dinner. The 900 warriors, now 900 captains, each training new recruits who came from across the territories seeking to join something meaningful, changing shifts along the walls. This was real. This was mine. Not because I'd been born to it, but because I'd built it with my own hands alongside people who chose to stand with me. I thought about the girl I'd been at 23, accepting a political marriage because it was her duty, hoping desperately that duty might somehow become love. She could never have imagined that losing everything would lead to gaining so much more, that falling would lead to being caught by destiny, that choosing herself would mean finding everything she deserved. Garrett kissed the mark on my neck, right where his teeth had sealed our bond. The sensation sparked through me, intimate and electric and absolutely right. "I love you," he whispered against my skin. "I love you too," I whispered back. "My mate, my partner, my equal." Our son kicked again, strong and sure, and I smiled up at the moon that had witnessed it all. The moon that had been full that first night when I'd stumbled and fallen and been caught by strong arms. The moon that had blessed our bond, guided our journey, watched us build something impossible and make it real. I was no longer Queen Rhiannon Emberwood, married by arrangement to a king who never wanted me. I was simply Rhiannon, mate, mother, leader, free. And as the stars wheeled overhead and our child moved within me, and Garrett held me safe, I closed my eyes and felt complete peace for the first time in my entire life. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what truly matters. Sometimes you have to fall to be caught by destiny. Sometimes you have to choose yourself before you can find everything you were always meant to have. I'd been a queen in a cage. Now I was an alpha building a kingdom of light, and I would never, ever go back.